Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyette, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. As part of this podcast partnership with Brick and Elm Magazine, I want to give a podcast shout out to the city of Tucumcari, to Ascension Academy, and to West Texas A&M University. The July-August issue of Brick and Elm is available now. You can find it in print or online at brickandelm.com. Today's guest is Laura Street. If you've worked in the nonprofit world, if you've served on a board, if you've been involved in the community in, any fashion at all, you've probably run into Laura. She has served on all kinds of local boards and organizations. She's the past executive director of the Laura W. Bush Institute for Women's Health at the Texas Tech Health Sciences Center. And back in 2005 and 2006, Laura was the founding executive director of the Globe News Center for the Performing Arts, where she led a campaign to raise more than $33 million and supervised the construction of that landmark building. She's everywhere and has all kinds of experience in development, in nonprofit management, in fundraising, and community leadership. And actually, I've been wanting to interview her for this podcast for several years, and we finally made it happen. So here's Laura Street. Laura Street, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honored to have you. I know you've listened to the show, and I appreciate that. I want to start with you the same way I start with all my guests, and that's just to ask why you're in Amarillo. So tell me the story of what brought you here in the first place.
I moved here with my husband from the Oklahoma City area because he bought the Toyota dealership here. I came kicking and screaming because my whole life was in the central Oklahoma area, but I wanted to stay married to him.
Okay.
So I came with him. It took me about a year to get used to Amarillo. I thought it would be relatively the same because we're close, actually, when you look at the map. It's a much different place. Once I got used to it and once I became involved in it, I never looked back.
Okay. Were you born and raised in the Oklahoma City area?
No, actually, I was born and raised in East Tennessee.
East Tennessee.
And
okay.
Joe and I met at the University of Oklahoma.
All right.
And he was born and raised in Oklahoma City. So he was going to go to law school and then took a year off after graduating from OU with our bachelor degrees, and we were married at the time, and decided he was going to sell cars because a fraternity dad had a car dealership for a year just to take some time off. He comes home one day and says, I'm not going to go to law school. I'm going to sell cars. And I said, no, you're not. I said,
That's not the plan.
No. They will eat you alive. You are calm. You're quiet. You have integrity and honesty. That's not the field for you.
Yeah, he doesn't fit the stereotype, though.
He does not fit the stereotype. And he said the right thing. He said, I really enjoy helping people find what they want. He didn't say, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to, he had the right answer. And look what he's done with it.
What year did you come to Amarillo? What year was that?
He came 83. I came 84, just a few months later because we were trying to sell our house.
So when he bought the dealership here, had he been in an ownership position in Oklahoma City, or was this like a brand new venture?
No, it was not. He actually, the first dealership that he worked with, one of the managers bought his own dealership in Norman, Oklahoma, and asked Joe to come as his general manager. And he said, if you'll come help me be successful, I'll help you buy your dealership.
Okay.
And that's exactly what happened.
Was it Amarillo just because that's where the opportunity was? You weren't looking specifically?
True. No, we weren't looking at Amarillo. Actually, he looked all over Oklahoma for maybe a Ford or a Chevrolet dealership or something like that. Couldn't find anything that he wanted. He started looking around at Toyota because he was at a Toyota dealership, and looked to see that Mr. Hermsmeyer here had this dealership here for many, many years, and the market share was not quite what he thought it should be. So he called Mr. Hermsmeyer and said, are you interested in selling your dealership? And he said no. Then he called Mr. Brunken in Lubbock, and Mr. Brunken said yes. So he goes through negotiations in Lubbock, and right at the last minute, Mr. Brunken changes his mind.
Okay.
And he comes home. He's so upset. He's so dejected. And then Mr. Hermsmeyer calls and says, Joe, I like you, and I think I do need to retire because my wife is ill, and it's time for me to turn the dealership over. And so we end up buying Hermsmeyer's dealership because he liked Joe.
Okay. Tell me what your career was in Oklahoma before you came here.
I started out as a physical therapist. I was a registered physical therapist. That was the degree I had from OU, and I did that for about 12 years. Then I decided I wanted to be a nurse practitioner. At that point, nurse practitioners weren't quite defined.
That was like, I don't feel like anyone was a nurse practitioner back then. Like, it wasn't common, at least here in Texas.
We were called assistants, not physician's assistants, but just assistants. And I had a degree in physical therapy. I just happened to work for several OBGYNs, working with childbirth education and pregnant patients and teaching exercises and things like that, along with the usual job I had as a physical therapist. I loved that. So I decided I wanted to be an OBGYN, nurse practitioner, except I didn't have a nursing degree. Just so happened one of the physicians I was working for was a faculty member at OU and said, why don't you come and go through the nurse practitioner program at OU, which then was only 6 weeks long.
Wow.
And what we did, though, was we go through the same rotation as the physicians do when they are in medical school, 6 weeks in each specialty. And at the end of that 6 weeks, we could go out into the field and do assistant work. Well, as it turned out, the laws caught up with me in that now, Oklahoma began to look at what this really meant for nurses and for anyone else who wasn't in nursing, and they decided you had to have a nursing degree. That was about the time I had a 2-year-old, and I said to Joe, I want to go back to school and be a nurse so I can be a nurse practitioner, even though I'd already had the training. So I did that, and I got an associate degree in nursing. And because I had a nursing degree at that point, but yet I had not done the training as a nurse practitioner under that, I went back through the nurse practitioner program a second time. But that time, the chairman of the department said, look, I'm just going to let you teach this thing. You already know all this. So that was kind of a roundabout way. And then we moved to Amarillo. And I realized that it was becoming much more formalized, and I needed to just get the credentials behind me. Because that's what I really wanted to do. So I went to WT, and I asked to be entered into their master's program for a nurse practitioner. And they said no. And I said, the reason I'm thinking that is because I already have a bachelor's degree in physical therapy, and I have a nursing degree, although it is an associate degree. Well, they finally said yes after I talked to them for several times. And then I realized I only need 3 courses to get a bachelor's degree in nursing too. Well, heck, why don't I just do that? So I ended up with a bachelor's degree in nursing as well and a master's degree as a nurse practitioner, and I practiced that for, several years until I changed to be the executive director of the Globe News Center for the Performing Arts.
I know that change was one of the things that sort of pushed you into more of a community leadership role. At least in a broader sense than your nursing career would have done. Was that something that felt like a stretch for you when that opportunity came? As while the Globe News Center was being developed, the idea was being considered, money being raised for it. Why did you move in that direction?
Well, here's kind of how I've always worked. My mother was one of those mothers, had 4 girls, always told us we could do anything we wanted to do if we work hard for it and if we learn. And that education was the most important thing that we could ever do for ourselves, because no one can take your education away from you. My parents did not have degrees, but all 4 of us ended up with college degrees. That sort of set the tone for me to, I can learn this, I can learn that, I can do what I want to do, but it's going to be some work to do that. And I will say that as I was a nurse practitioner, especially at the Texas Tech Health Sciences Center in the OBGYN department, I did a lot of volunteer work in the arts. And I remember residents asking me, a couple of the residents would say, well, Laura, why are you doing all that work out there in the community, in the arts, when you could be working more with indigent patients here at Texas Tech? I said, I do that all day, every day. What I do is I go out into the community. I work for nonprofit organizations that are symphony, opera, ballet, theater. It makes my soul soar. I come back the next day and I can do so much more. I'm so much better connected with my patients that for me, that's my holistic view of what I need to do to take great care of those patients.
Okay.
In the same time, I ended up with a leadership role at Texas Tech Health Sciences Center. I had a chairman who gave me an account and said, I want you to build me a women's health center that is a women's health center for the community, not, the clinics that we usually have.
Right.
So I opened up a separate center. I started a mammography program. I bought the first bone densitometry machine in the area, learned how to do that. I was doing lectures all over the United States, actually, on osteoporosis and women's health and endocrinology. I became a infertility nurse practitioner for 5 years. So I went to all the national conferences because I love national professional conferences. You meet so many people. You learn so much from other people. And I'm a visual audio learner.
Okay.
Nothing kinetic about me, really, about that. So it was wonderful. I had a women's clinic there, a women's practice that I remember one OBGYN called me, a local one here in Amarillo, and said, Laura, are you trying to compete with us? And I said, no, there's enough business to go around. I just know that I have a group of faculty physicians here who are very good at what they do, and they really keep up with the new research because they teach other physicians. And there's no reason why those who might want to take advantage of that would do that. And he said, that just sounds like you're competing. I said, okay, if you think I'm decreasing your business, then I want you and I to go out and have a cup of coffee. I learned a long time ago, you never say no, and you never put yourself in a position where you are offensive without understanding the other person's point of view.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey, did all of his courses and read his books and so forth. And that's why I do get myself in a lot of conversations, because somebody will come to me with an idea and I go, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk some more about that. When I know in my mind that is not going to work, it's not feasible. But I have been surprised many times with those conversations at what can happen, especially when you talk about something new and different in our community. So that sort of set the tone for learning things, doing things, having the relationships with people that are good and positive. I am an optimist at heart. I don't understand pessimism and I don't understand negativity. I just don't work that way. That also can get me in trouble because I'll say, oh, I can do this. And I get into it and think, oh, no, I'm not really the right person for this one. I've done that a couple of times. So when the Globe News Center for the Performing Arts conversation came around, at that time it was the Southwest Performing Arts Center. I had been having a conversation just in passing with the Ron Boyd and Bill and Sandra Gilliland and Mary Emeny and others about this new project. And then at one point, I thought, well, I'll just help them with relationships and whatever I can do volunteer-wise. And Caroline Emeny, Bush Emeny, made the first donation to get the project started. And a couple of people came to talk to me and said, we want you to help us out. And I said, sure. In my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to volunteer whatever time I can. And I had seen Ron Boyd at a reception one night, and I said, how's it going finding that executive director for the Performing Arts Center? And he said, well, we can't find anybody who really knows the community well. Oh, okay. The next day, I get a call from Bill Gilliland. Laura, Ron says you might be open to a conversation. And I said, Bill, I'm always open to a conversation. What do you need? Well, I want you to come talk to us. So the next day, I go in and talk to him. And what was happening at the Health Sciences Center at that point was I had been through 5 chairmen of the OBGYN department. The 6th one was just about to start. Bill said, we know you can start a nonprofit organization. We want you to start the organization, get this thing organized, get it off the ground, and be the executive director. I said, I think I'll do it. Because the timing is right for me. I know nothing about any of that, but maybe I can figure it out. Of course, they sort of just looked over everything I said about maybe I can figure it out. So I talked to Joe about it, of course, and he says, Laura, I don't know, that's just so different from what you've always done. And I said, but it just sounds like so much fun and it's different. And I'm really tired of the way things have been going in my career lately. And I just think I'd like to take a little change. So when I talked to the Gillilands and Mary, and I think Tom Bivens was in there too, and Ron Boyd, I said, look, I don't know how to fundraise, don't like to do it, don't want to do it. So I really don't want to do anything about the fundraising. And Bill said, okay, we've got that covered. That's fine. If you'll just do all the other stuff as executive director. Okay. So I move out of the Health Sciences Center into GoCo Energy offices. They put me the nicest office together, and if I wanted a plant or if I wanted a certain chair or, whatever, I thought, well, this is great. I have an office with a big window and people are kind. And not that they weren't kind at the Health Sciences Center, but 2 weeks into that, Bill walks into my office and says, here's the list of people that we're going to be talking to for fundraising, that we're going to be asking for funding. And I said, Bill, you told me I didn't have to do that. He said, well, I lied, Laura. I said, and of course, he said it in a way that was not offensive.
In a charming way, right?
In a very charming way. But it just surprised me so much that after he left my office, I just sat there. I said, okay, Laura, you may be dumb, but you're not stupid. You can figure this out. So on my way home from work that day, I stop at Barnes & Noble and I buy a book called Fundraising for Dummies.
Okay.
It was actually there.
Yeah.
I go home, I read it, try and figure out what I don't know about any of this, and I know nothing. So I join the Association for Fundraising Professionals. I enroll in an online certificate in nonprofit management and fundraising through the University of Illinois at Chicago. Worked on that for 9 months. And
Because you were good at educating yourself at that point.
I'm a studier.
You'd made a career at that.
I'm a studier. I joined the Alliance of Nonprofit Managers, and I figure it out.
Yeah.
I still don't like to fundraise, but I'm one of the community fundraisers. And that's what I do because somebody's got to do it. We have such generosity in our area, and it's just amazing what we can do when we work together. That project, the Globe News Center, was the most fun I have ever had. And I would do it all over again. It was 5 years. At the end of it, Joe said, please, can we not talk about the Globe News Center anymore? Because everywhere we went, that's all anybody wanted to talk about.
I know the Globe News Center project was several years, but eventually it got built. Eventually it wasn't necessary, for you to be involved in that full time. So tell me sort of what that transition looked like. How did you know when that part of your career was over?
I had so much fun with that project, but I realized that I could not go back to being a nurse practitioner or a nurse because I had lost my skills, and I'd be dangerous if I did that. And I really enjoyed the nonprofit management and fundraising part of it. Well, fundraising is not my favorite, but the nonprofit management. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go into nonprofit management. But I was still at the Globe News Center, and I was really happy at the time when we opened on January 2006. And as the months went by, about 3, 4, 5 months, I realized that I was upset because there would be scuffs on the floor or the green room furniture rearranged because the technicians wanted to make it out of a lounge. It's not a lounge, it's a green room. And Ms. Bentley and I would move the furniture back, and then they'd come in and move it again, or maybe there was a corner not vacuumed quite well, and the city was taking great care of the building. So those were such picky things. But there's a thing called founder syndrome. Mm-hmm. It's in nonprofit management. It's an actual diagnosis. There are books written about it. There are articles written about it. I had learned about that when I was working on my nonprofit management certificate. I took the article out and I gave it to the board members at the time. And I said, this is something we need to be careful of because each one of us are founders of this project.
The idea of founder syndrome is that you get so connected to a project, it begins to take on your personality. And it's hard to let it go, sometimes to the detriment of the project itself, right?
Exactly. What happens is you begin to make decisions based on your personal wishes and desires, your personal thoughts and what you think this organization should be doing, and not actually talking to others about what the community thinks or what your board thinks or what your organization thinks. So you get too personal with it. And when that happens, the organization can fail because then it's no longer an organization of the public or of the board. And that's what was happening to me. And I knew about it. But I recognized it because I understood, I had read about it before and I understood it. And when the scuffs on the floor began to bother me, I thought, it's time to get out of the project. So I did, loved nonprofit management, and I said, I'll just do consulting. So Charlotte Rhodes helped me put together a consulting practice, and I did nonprofit management and fundraising for 5 years as a consultant. What I found out about myself is I'm not a very good businesswoman. I really don't need to be an entrepreneur because I don't like to send out invoices and take in payments and
Okay.
keep up with taxes.
So the transactional side is the side you don't like. You like the work, just
I like
not
the work. I just don't want to do, but it wasn't a big enough project to hire somebody to do that, or I didn't want to get into it that much. I decided at one point that, maybe I don't need to be a nonprofit management consultant. And Joe had said to me, we were having a conversation, he said, why don't you love to do that work. Why don't you just continue what you want to do and just don't charge for it? You don't have to. Just work with a nonprofit you want to work with. And so I did. I don't know why I had to have permission to do that, but I did. I think it was part of the thought that as a career, you always think of what you need to get back for what you give. That's just a thought about working in a career, which is different from a job. A career is totally different from a job. And so being career-minded, I thought I needed to have that kind of business transaction going on for me to be legitimate.
Okay.
Well, that's really false. You don't have to have that to be legitimate. Because I found out I could work for nonprofits in lots of different ways, in strategic planning and fundraising and event planning. I really enjoyed doing that. And I did that for lots of nonprofits because, gosh, I quit that, be 2011, I guess, 2012. And ever since, I've just been volunteering my time. I've really enjoyed working with all the nonprofits I've worked with because it's been so varied, from arts to economic development, Chamber of Commerce. I've been president of, I think, 18 boards.
Wow.
I've worked with over 30 boards, local, state, and national. I was on the National Symphony Orchestra League Volunteer Council Board for a while. And president of the state Texas Association for Symphony Orchestras, and the Perinatal Association, which is a OBGYN association.
Okay.
So I'd had lots of differences in what I like to do and what I want to do. Challenges. It's all challenges. And I really don't know what I'm getting myself into when I take on a challenge. I just say, okay, to myself, you can figure this out. You've done this before, and you can do a good job if you want to do a good job. There was one initiative that is now the Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance.
Okay.
Tom Luce, who was Assistant Secretary of State under George Bush, came to talk to me from Dallas one day. We had lunch, and he said the Meadows Foundation is starting a Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, and they're putting a board together, and they want me to be one of the original board members. They were putting 13 board members together to represent the Panhandle area. I said, oh, Tom, I know medicine, but I know nothing about mental health, mental illness. They don't teach you that in medical school. They don't teach you that in nursing school. You don't know anything about it. I never learned. There's no insurance for it. Nobody cares about it. There's no funding. There's no research. It's just not something I know much about. Surely there's someone else. And he says, Laura, we just hear you can call anybody. Okay. We want you to call the people that you need to call to get this thing put together. And give us a year. At the end of the year, if it's not your thing, then fine. Well, that was 10 years ago.
Okay.
9.5 years ago, I think. Okay. But I'll tell you, I spent a year procrastinating so well that I was doing a really bad job. I really didn't want to do it, but I couldn't resign. I couldn't just back off. I said, Lord, you got to figure this one out. Finally, I was at the Man and Woman of the Year event when Rod Schroeder got up to do his acceptance speech for Man of the Year. And the first thing he says is, I never have a plan for myself. God has that plan for me. And I look up and I go, okay, fine. That's my signal in it. So I started from that day forward, and I put the Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance together. I was on the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute board for 9 years. I helped them put that organization together. I was the governance chair, and now it's got an annual budget of $20 million,
Wow.
and it's still supported by foundations and individuals, and it does work beyond Texas into the nation. And it's an amazing project, an amazing board, and I thoroughly enjoyed being involved in that.
And you've been involved in major projects like that. I know you were also involved as a consultant helping out the Barrio Neighborhood Project. Just stuff that has a much larger than Amarillo sort of feel, and then something that's just a community within the city.
Right, and I love the Barrio. Really, it's all everything that happens in this world is about the leadership. If there's good leadership, it can happen. It takes more than one person. It takes a team, always takes a team. Nothing I have ever done, I've done by myself. It's always been a team of people because we all have weaknesses. We have strengths and weaknesses, and we need to know what those are. We need to really look into ourselves and see what are our strengths and weaknesses so that we know what things we do well and what things we don't do well. It's all a team effort. So the Barrio just happens to have, in the neighborhood, Barrio Neighborhood Committee, led by Teresa Kennedy and several others in that Barrio area, such a passion for that neighborhood and how it began, the history of that neighborhood. I've taken my grandchildren by car to look at the homes and the fact that those alleyways are dirt because they started in 1889.
Yeah. Near the railroad tracks because they were building the railroad tracks.
Because they were building the railroads. And so they never had a developer put in alleyways and streets and things like that. But yet, people who care so much about the Barrio who don't live there, but maybe their parents do or maybe their grandparents did, want to see that neighborhood thrive. But what it really is about, and I've always said this about the Globe News Center, it's just a building. It's what it does for people that makes a difference. The Barrio is just a neighborhood, but it's what it does for people that makes a difference. And that is the glue that holds that Hispanic neighborhood, which is far beyond the Barrio boundaries, together.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about, off mic when we weren't recording was that technically this is your retirement. You're consulting that you're not charging for. You view it as a retirement, and that you continue to have projects. It doesn't matter if you are compensated for it or not. You're just lending your leadership skills in a variety of directions. I want to talk about a couple of the things I know you've been involved with, and just kind of hear your thoughts about them. Number one, you and Joe have been very involved with Transformation Park from a philanthropic side of things, and I wonder if you could tell me just a little bit about that.
Well, and Joe has been involved with the homeless Guy and Saunders Resource Center and the homeless project, 30 years, I would say. That's sort of his passion. And he and I don't do the same things because he and I both like to make decisions, and sometimes our decisions I can't work at that dealership.
Yeah.
Just Joe said, I have to make decisions
You've got
somewhere.
your own spheres of influence.
Right. So that was always his project, but every Christmas, our family would get together and we would put together, first of all, it was gift bags of things that the homeless people need, like shaving cream and little protein snacks and combs and brushes and socks and hats and scarves and things. And we did about 150 of them for, I think now it's probably close to 20 years. That turned into backpacks, and Sharon Esker joined us in that, and we ended up putting all kinds of things in a backpack. And we take, on Christmas morning, we take it to the Guy and Saunders Resource Center, and the homeless line up, and our family hands them out and says Merry Christmas to them. My grandson, who started it, he's almost 18 now, and he was 7, I think, when we started that project. He wanted to pray for the homeless there. I mean, it came to be such a family thing. So here we are now at the point where Transformation Park has formed, and the Guy and Saunders Resource Center building is sold, and now we're having to move to a new day center, and the board wanted to build a new day center. Joe purchased the land. He hired the architect and the engineers to put the plan together. Actually had some land that the neighborhood that he had the land in didn't want it there, and so he had to sell that land and buy another piece of land. And he worked really hard on that. And as it turned out, it's going to be the day center of Transformation Park, because when he was going through that process, Jason Riddlesberger, who is community development, director of the city, said he wanted to see if the city would help with that building so he could move the community development offices there. That's all the social workers that work with the homeless. And that's what was happening. So the city added 40% to that building for those offices, and that was under the last council. Then they put together Transformation Park because of Hillside Christian Church, and Tommy Politz led that project, and now Mark Zimmerman is executive director of Transformation Park. Then the whole project started coming together, where the Guy Saunders Resource Center is the only day center for the homeless to get what they need. There's night shelters, but not a day shelter, not a day place. So Transformation Park was not only going to bring in the pallet shelters for nighttime and have a parking lot if you want to live in your car, or an area for your tent if you want to do that, but to have the day center and the night and all of that put together under Transformation Park. So it was intended when Guy Saunders Resource Center, the new day center, was completed, that would be turned over to Transformation Park, and the Guy Saunders Resource Organization, 501c3, would dissolve. Then everything the homeless needs is in one place, and it's all coordinated. And it's a great public-private partnership.
Right. And it's a new sort of model for the city.
New model for the city. We have other cities our size that are calling and talking to Mark about, we want to know how this happens because we're really watching you. Joe was all involved in that. As it turned out, we had some change in the administration and the board of the Guy Saunders Resource Center, and that was when Joe said, okay, I need some help. We need some help with fundraising. We need some help with strategic planning. We need some help with administration. And so I entered into that project.
Okay.
And I said to the board president at the time, I said, I am happy to be involved in this. I just need for you to know that this is Joe's project. I usually don't get involved in that, but he's invited me to do that. And I just need to make sure that everyone understands that I'm not in charge here, because I tend to take charge of things when I walk in the door. And I've tried to be very cognizant of that. The present council didn't know if they had enough resources to support that. So there's been some conversation about whether or not they can. Lots of conversations later. It's going to happen the way we intended it to happen, we think. There's not been a council vote yet, so it could not happen. But our hope is that we have $4.5 million already raised towards a $9 million building, that at the end of and we will raise the rest of the money. The end of the project, when it's turned over to the city, it's exactly like the Globe News Center. And I do believe in divine guidance. I think I'm here because I've been through that project where we had to do all the turning over the keys to the city and ask the city for some resources to be able to do that. And what's the transition like? And how do we legally transfer this? Very same thing that's happening right now. So we're leading that effort and waiting for the council to
get it to the finish line. The last thing I wanted to ask about, and you and I have had multiple conversations about this in previous settings, but and we don't have to cover in depth or at length, but I know that another project that could be something very large that you were involved with is sort of winding up the range, as a very large scale agriculture focus for the future of this area. And one of those things that you were very involved at the beginning and then kind of put in motion, and now you're hoping to see it run its course and become what you thought it would be. Can you just briefly describe what that is and why it's something you got involved with? Because again, it's not, people don't typically think of you, in relationship to cattle feeding or feedlots or dairy farms and those kinds of things.
I don't think of me into that either. It's like I knew nothing about the performing arts when I started in that project. I know nothing about agriculture and food production when I started this project. I am here on earth to put people together, to put the right people together, to facilitate. And that's my purpose. And again, you have to have others who can take care of your weaknesses when you're looking at a new project. I was a chairman of the board at the Amarillo Economic Development Corporation. when we started talking about, things that we could do that were beyond what the Amarillo area is, because we've got all these companies that are calling us and interested in the Amarillo Panhandle area, not just Amarillo, but the Panhandle area, on bringing in business. And at the time I was on the Texas Tech, I'm still on the Texas Tech Research Park Board. And we've had a lot of discussion on that board about regional research parks. I asked Kevin Carter at the time, I said, can we just look into this and see maybe what the possibilities are for our area? And he said, sure. I said, but I don't know anything about agriculture and food production. I do know there's a Dr. Matt Garner, who's an expert at that. He has a PhD in beef and dairy, or PhD related to beef and dairy. And I'd like to hire him and just do some interviews and see what we've got here. So I hired Matt Garner, or the AEDC did. We did over 150 interviews of business owners, organizations, agencies, individuals in the Panhandle of Texas. And all of those interviews, no one said, no, we don't need to be doing that, or no, I don't want to do that. They all said, yes, it's time for us to do something synergistic in our area because we have so much in resources. At the time, the Texas Tech Research Park Board had hired a national firm called HR&A Advisors because they put in research and innovation hubs all over the United States. Actually, the director that we ended up working with was in charge of the North Carolina Research Triangle.
Right.
So we hired them to do a feasibility study. And Bob Giolis is the director who I worked with, who is a senior director, said, Laura, not only do you have a lot of resources here in this area, but you actually have everything you need to be a global food hub right now, today, if you can put it together. You have the largest beef and dairy shed in the nation, in the world, right here. Other places have beef, other places have dairy, but nobody has
both.
What you have here. You put agriculture with that, and you have an Amarillo Global Food Hub. Okay. So Matt and I said to each other, we've got people who are saying, yes, we've got a good feasibility study. Let's go for it. We start the work on the range. It became the Regional Accelerator and New Growth Engine because we hired a marketing firm from LA to come up with a logo and a name and, who are we and what should we look like to the public, because we're about to be global. And the fellow that worked with us, Brandon, from the firm, actually did the Louis Vuitton rebranding in Paris, and we thought, oh, this is not going to work too well. But they have an employee who's from Amarillo. That's how we knew about this firm. So we bring these three guys in from LA. They spend 2.5 days going around all over the Panhandle, talking to people and learning about what we are. And at the end of that, I said, okay, Brandon, tell me, I want to know the one thing that you are surprised about that you didn't expect in our area that's going to be part of who we are. He said, frankly, Laura, I have never been involved in an area that has so much care of others and care of the family as I have here in the Panhandle of Texas. He said, this is going to be like a homecoming. Whatever we come up with is going to feel like a homecoming. So they came up with the Regional Accelerator and New Growth Engine, The Range, Welcome Home to the Range. I love that, because it is who we are. And he said, you've got to be, and this is what Bob Giolis said also, you have to be authentic to who you are, or you'll never be successful. Your authenticity is the Panhandle takes care of each other. They care about people. It's not just about cows, and it's not just about milk. It's about people.
And the thing that I like about that, and I guess that's the storytelling aspect of it that always gets my attention, is that Nashville is known for music, and Silicon Valley is known for technology, Napa is known for wine, and the idea is that the Texas Panhandle becomes known for food, that we're the leader in food production, whether it's actually producing the cattle and the beef or the technology that's related to it and the transportation that's related to it, all those different things. And so it's a long-term project that's looking, not to next year, but like a generation from now. Where are we?
Absolutely, 50 years from now.
Yeah.
Where do we want to be? And that's actually an example that he gave us. He said, you can be to food what these other places are to what they're known for. And he said it usually takes 20 years. He said, you have enough behind you right now that it could take 10 years if you can start off and get going pretty fast. It takes at least 5 years to even get the first return coming in. You could do it in 3, 4, 5 years. It just depends on how well everyone will come together. Matt and I went to visit the Permian Strategic Partnership down in Midland, Odessa area, which was 20 oil and gas companies who came together because the infrastructure down there is just being torn up.
Yeah.
There's so many bad things happening down there because of the infrastructure, the things that are happening to that area. They found that if they put in $1 million apiece for the smaller companies, $2 million apiece for the larger companies every year for 5 years, then they could access state and federal funding that would bring in lots of funding for other things. One of their first projects was they hired a national firm to write a grant to the federal government for infrastructure road work. Cost them $1 million to do that grant, but they got back $600 million.
Yeah.
We could do that.
That sort of collaboration and partnership.
Right. So what happened with what we were trying to put together became a way to open our doors and open our ways of being able to bring in federal and state funds that are slated for exactly what we're talking about, that we don't have to beg for. We just have to write a grant for it, and we match. And we've had some success on that so far. We've learned a lot. We had we hired HRNA in the very beginning to be our staff. Okay, we don't know how to put this together. You stay with us for a year. Let's figure out how to put this together, and then we can take it from there, possibly. What we thought was going to come together in the very beginning did not come together. And frankly, that was because when we got down to saying, okay, it's time to write the check, then, people would back up and say, well, I'm just not sure. Come back to me when I know we're really going to do something. Or, I'm just not sure how this works for my business. And of course, the activist in me wants to say, wait a minute, this is for the future. Mm-hmm. Why are we, some of these businesses can write a check for the whole thing. But, you can't work that way. Everyone has to be happy in this.
It's yet another project that you've been a part of that, could potentially be transformative in this area. And I want to just to close this up. You ended up in Amarillo because there was an opportunity to buy a dealership in the 80s. And here you are still and have been able to get involved in like almost every part of this community. And I wonder if you could just kind of tell me, number one, does it surprise you that you've ended up here and so immersed in Amarillo, having, grown up in other places? And number two, like, what keeps you here? Like, why are you still here and still involved?
Yes, I am surprised because when I started out in my 20s, we moved here when I was 34. I was just taking challenges here and there because I like to take a challenge and trying this and trying that. And it was all about me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't anything about the community at all. Joe and I did not do any volunteer work. We did not have philanthropy in our plans when we lived in Oklahoma City area. We moved here and we looked at each other and said, oh, wait, we don't know anybody. What are we going to do? I don't know. I signed up for everything I could sign up for to meet people, and no one would call me because they didn't know me.
Yeah.
As it turned out, Mark Bivens, who got a pyrotechnic license from the Gucci brothers up in New York City, wanted to start a new project called Discover, which had to do with having a concert and having fireworks to work with the music on the concert. And he brought, I think it was 7 car dealers together and their wives to talk about being the supporters of that particular project. Of course, the car dealers said yes, they would. They would support the fireworks. And I just said to Mark at the time, we were at their ranch, you need any help with that project, let me know because I'm looking for something to do. And he did let me help, and I chaired the next one. And then after that, I started getting phone calls like, will you help me with this?
You had proven yourself enough that people were interested.
But it was a tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
And then I just never looked back.
It's relationships. I mean, people operate on relationships here, and sometimes you have to prove yourself to get into those circles.
And I tell younger people when they're asking me questions like that, I said, the world runs around relationships. If you have the relationships, things are going to work really well for you. I mean, and that's really what it is. If you don't have the relationships, it's just not, it's really much, much harder to do. As far as where we are now, a few years ago, we started thinking, well, maybe we need to start talking about where we might want to retire. We could not think of any place. It really didn't take very long at all for us to realize that this is where we are, because we are part of the fabric of Amarillo. We're one of those threads in that fabric. We want to continue to do the work that we do for the community until we can't do it anymore. And I've realized that, yes, I am going to end up doing more traveling, and, we've got other places that we can be, and things to do with family. But as long as people will ask me to help them with the project, I'm going to be there until I can't do it anymore. I do get worried at some point about, what if I don't say the right thing and my brain's not working quite as well? Will somebody tell me that? Because I won't know.
I don't worry about that for you. This episode of Hey Amarillo is supported by Dr. Eddie Sauer, who practices general dentistry at Shemin Dental Group. Eddie has been my dentist since I was in college. He's taken care of my kids' teeth ever since their teeth showed up. Dr. Sauer is a national speaker on Invisalign and uses that technology to improve his patients' smiles and positioning. We've used it in our family with great results, a lot of success. It's so much easier than metal braces, which is what I had when I was a kid. I wish I had had Invisalign back then. You can learn more by following Shemin Dental on Facebook or visit shemindental.com. That's SHEMEN. Okay, I'm back with Laura Street. Laura, this is the part of the show I call 8 Straight. 8 Straight is sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas, and its collection includes multiple spur designs used by Texas cowboys throughout the 19th century. I've looked at those, and some of those spurs are really, really big. So it makes me worry about the horses a little bit. But you can learn more, and you can see those spurs at panhandleplains.org. Okay, the first question, and I know that you've probably given this a lot of thought. When you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
By the way, I love the idea of the spurs and the 8. I think that's an amazing thing to go into.
Cowboys should just wear, people who wear boots should wear spurs anyway. They just have a lot of fun and jangle to your outfit.
10 years from now, I really want to see Amarillo as a thriving, growing community that supports the underserved and our businesses and industry, and has a vision for the future, and a feeling that we are regional. Yes, we're Amarillo, but we are a region, and I did not understand until the last probably 15 years how connected we are to each other in the Panhandle.
Mm-hmm. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
In terms of thinking about, we can't do something.
Okay.
That we can't be whoever we want to be. We don't have enough workers. We don't have and that's true. We don't have enough workers, but there are ways to get through that, and that's, if we work together, we can do that.
More taking a negative approach to challenges and figuring out ways that we shouldn't be able to do something than overcoming those obstacles and finding our way into it.
Right, exactly.
What does this area not have enough of?
Infrastructure. And I think about infrastructure because I really feel for our city council right now, and the fact that they're trying so hard to take care of an aging infrastructure, and we don't have enough monetary and human resources to do that for the present, much less for future growth. And future growth to me is extremely important. If we had, we've got one of the lowest tax rates in the state of Texas, and I think we don't have enough of those resources, and I do hope that at some point our citizenry will decide that we all need to pitch in more, whether it's taxes or otherwise, to support our city.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with a lot of people, even on this podcast, and we think about what are the things that draw people to Amarillo, and we think about quality of life and the stuff that's available. Nobody thinks about the tax rate.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that we value, but it's never as strong as like how it feels to live here and the amenities that you might have. And so at some point those have to balance out, I feel like.
They do. And I it seems like we have a lot of citizens who think that they want no more taxes. But then when the potholes don't get taken care of, when we find out that we have sewage pipes that are just about to burst because they're
Right.
so old, when we can't bring in youth tournaments because we don't have enough parks amenities and youth sports complexes and so forth. At some point, we have to realize that, and my mother was one of those people who always didn't want the IRS to have a thing, a penny. I said, Mom, we have to have bridges and schools. Amarillo has to have schools and bridges um, and roads and parks and taking care of the disadvantaged. We have to have that, but in order to do that, we're going to have to pay a little bit more sometimes in taxes. And I realize that I'm in a position in life that I don't even need to be talking about anything like that because there are those who just plain cannot afford it.
Right.
I understand that, and I feel for that, and I hope that someday we figure out what that balance is.
What's your favorite local neighborhood?
Well, I'd probably have to say the Colonies because I live there. I do talk a lot about the barrio because I'm excited about them. We have a lot of great neighborhoods in our area. I think about San Jacinto and North Heights because they want to do something different. But yeah, I live in the Colonies.
I mean, it is, Colonies is an interesting neighborhood because it is pretty new, and because it's new, it has a different feel from a lot of the older neighborhoods in Amarillo. Just from the planning standpoint, there's a lot of walkable paths and green spaces and that sort of thing there.
Right, and we finally are at the point where I live, we have trees.
Yes,
and they shade the
10 or 12 years into it, the trees have grown.
Yeah.
What's your favorite local restaurant?
Oh, I would have to say Crush. I go there a lot. Actually, that's probably a second office for me.
Okay.
I have a lot of meetings there. That's hard to say because I have a lot of favorite restaurants too. Ohms and Macaroni Joe's, and I could, Amarillo Club. I love the Amarillo Club. It's hard to say.
Okay. What's the most underrated aspect of living in Amarillo?
Oh, I think the generosity of our people. I think most people don't really understand that generosity and how, I say with any nonprofit organization that's asking me about fundraising and is this the right time and do we need to be asking this much and, so on and so forth. And I tell them the story about in the Globe News Center when 9/11 happened. I was driving to the airport to pick up our new consultant in fundraising from Houston. And all the planes start coming out of the sky.
Yeah.
And I get to the airport and I ask the security guard what's going on, and he tells me. So it just so happens that this consultant was a friend of mine. And when he gets in the car, I said, Bob, do we need to stop fundraising? And he said, absolutely not, Laura. Money is going to continue to change hands, and you need to be in the way. I tell all nonprofit organizations, money will continue to change hands no matter what's happening. It might be more difficult, but you need to be in the way. And that all fundraising projects, if you'll look at what's happened in the past, have been completed because of perseverance.
That's interesting. Speaking of fundraising and nonprofits, I know you've been involved with a lot, but what's your favorite local nonprofit? Do you have one that you can point to?
Well, I have a lot of nonprofits that I love, and that's because they all are part of the community that I love. Probably the one I've been most involved with from the very beginning is the Symphony.
Okay.
And frankly, one of the reasons I decided to work on the Performing Arts Center was because I wanted a different place, a better place for our symphony to perform. But we realized we couldn't afford just a symphony hall. We needed a multi-purpose hall, so the architect just gave us both with that shell. But the symphony, to me, has been integral to our community. And you look at the research, music is everything when it comes to how the brain works, how people relate to each other, how people feel, the mental health of our community, the education of our children. And you don't have to be a concert violinist to take violin in high school. But I'll tell you, there were a couple of medical students would ask me occasionally, why are you involved in that arts? I said, well, look, Dr. So-and-so is a violinist, Dr. So-and-so is a cellist, and we have a chair of the department who's a concert organist. And they're three of the most, as you would see, the smartest, most intelligent, best doctors we have in our area, right? Right. Well, because music to me is probably one of the most important things that we can involve ourselves and our families and our comrades and our community in.
Okay. And the last question, when was the last time you visited Palo Duro Canyon?
Well, let's see, maybe 3 years ago. When somebody comes in, I take them down there. I'm not a hiker so much down in the Palo Duro Canyon because there's snakes. I'll hike in the mountains just about anywhere and other places, but not in the canyon. I love the canyon, though. I brag about it a lot. It is the second largest canyon in the nation, 100 miles long, and oh my gosh, it's gorgeous.
Okay, that concludes the 8 straight questions. My last question is to ask if you have anything to endorse. I like to ask my guests to tell listeners something that you would like them to know about or to experience.
Well, to me, if the music scene, I think, is becoming more and more obvious in our area. And of course, as you know, music is really important to me for a lot of different reasons. I think the more I see music happening here, I applaud everything that's happening from country western to orchestral, folk music, and everything in between, the individuals who perform to the huge groups who perform. I mean, Hodgetown is really good at bringing together, like the Hodgetown event for the symphony and others. I just think looking at the calendar, look at the calendar all the time, and surely there's something there that agrees with you or that aligns with what you would like to do. But get out there and really listen to our music, the Botanical Gardens, the Wednesday noon Center City performances. I mean, you name it, we've got it all over the place. And I'm sort of at a time in life when it's going to be really funny if I start doing this. But I said to Joe, I said, I think I might want to start bar hopping.
just to catch the bands that are coming
I could
through.
just have a sarsaparilla and listen to the music.
Well, then people can look for you at the concerts at the Golden Light, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, Laura Street, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes the episode. I want to say thanks to Laura for the interview. Thanks also to Shemin Dental and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting this podcast. And as always, thanks to Angelina Marie for editing the show. And thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you like the show, I'd love for you to go review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Barbara and Jim Witten, Cindy Graham, Wes Reeves, Josh Wood, Corey Burns, Katie Linger, Jason Burr, and Patrick Burns. This has been episode 364. My name is Jason Boyette, and I'll see you next week.